You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 20th of February 2026 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, broadcasting live from Studio One here at Midori House in London. I'm Chris Chermak. Coming up on today's programme, we'll look at Sweden's Civil Reserve Force, a training for the nation's non-military professionals in the event of conflict or national disaster. Elizabeth Braw will explain whether the concept can be brought to other countries around the world. After that,
the absolutely crazy thing in Europe is that we spend a huge amount of money on defence but don't get much output. And the reason for that is because every country has their own rifle, their own tank.
We'll hear from the MP Mike Martin, a British Army Reserve officer who sits on the House of Commons Defence Select Committee. And then the Winter Olympics are winding down this weekend. We'll check in one more time with Desiree Bandley in Zurich for an update on Austria versus Switzerland and a look at the newest discipline, the skimo. And finally,
I think what has made the difference for me in this experience is the people that have been working with me in the team.
Raffaella Paniè there is the Director of Brand and Identity at the Games. All that right here on The Briefing with me, Chris Chermak. And a very happy Friday to all of our listeners around the world. Now, as we near the 4th anniversary of the war in Ukraine, which continues despite the best US efforts to bring it to a close, talk in Europe rumbles on about whether the continent could face a broader conflict with Russia or even, as impossible as it may seem, the United States. Well, focus in many countries has been on whether to bring back military conscription. But Sweden is among those that's also training a civilian reserve. Electricians and firefighters are in the process of being trained for contingencies. And joining me now from southern Sweden to explain more is Elizabeth Braw, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council, author of the upcoming title, Undersea War. Elizabeth, thanks so much for coming on the show from southern Sweden.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
So you've been looking at the Swedish and kind of other civilian reserve models. You've also been part of a commission, I understand, investigating whether this could be brought here to the UK. So tell us what sets the Swedish system apart.
Well, the most important thing that sets it apart is that it's the only one. So Sweden has done what no other country has managed to do, which is to conceive and set up a civil reserve. And there are 19 professions included in this reserve. And those professions, people in those professions are beginning to be trained, selected and trained for this civil reserve at the moment. And the first profession to be selected and trained was electricians. So there is now in Sweden an electrician a reserve force, even though that's not the official name, but that's what it is. And these people can, if war were to happen in Sweden, if the Russians were to bomb Swedish electricity infrastructure the way they've done in Ukraine, then these electricians who have been trained as electricity repair crews or electricity repairmen would deploy out and fix the electricity infrastructure.
So that gives us a little example of how this is going to work. But tell us also about the process, how this was set up in Sweden. I do understand that people were chosen for this reserve. It is a legal requirement, but you did also have some people you write about, the electricians, even wanting to volunteer for it.
Indeed. So I have to say it's a brilliant system that the Swedish authorities have set up. And as you mentioned earlier, I was part of a UK government commission looking at how a civil reserve could be set up in the UK, which was something that the then government decided should happen back in 2021. But it was so difficult to make it work that it didn't happen in the end, even though the commission I was on did create a plan. But anyway, in Sweden, they've done it. And so the way the selection works is that the agency in charge of this electricity repair reserve, they found they looked in the registry of all the licensed electricians in the country, and then they selected the ones that they wanted to be part of that reserve, essentially depending on age. So not too young and not above the age of 70, which is when you're no longer obliged to help, and also with a geographical spread. And then they wrote to them saying, we would like to invite you, and here is a questionnaire for you to fill out so that we can get more details about you. And based on that questionnaire, they then selected the lucky few.
And this is obviously the idea of training electricians and others, as you mentioned in your example. I mean, this is partly about hybrid warfare, isn't it? Something we are already seeing, of course, as part of the last few years, sabotaging Baltic Sea cables, as you've written an entire book about. I mean, is that a reality that other countries beyond Sweden just haven't quite come to grips with yet in terms of what they need to do for their people and their governments to be ready for it?
Yeah, so the first thing to remember is that the war is becoming a more likely reality in Europe. And the second thing to remember is that the Russians don't play by any rules. And so in Ukraine, the Russians have shown that they are willing to use any means, including targeting civilians and civilian infrastructure, which is why it's so important to have people who are trained and part of an established force who can then deploy or essentially go out to wherever such damage has taken place to get, in this case, the electricity infrastructure working again. Because if, in this case, the electricity infrastructure is left unrepaired, well, life becomes unlivable in a country. And the 18 other professions included by Sweden in the civil reserve, that's everything from undertakers to firefighters. So, and all these professions have been selected because they will have particularly important tasks to carry out in case of a war, and so they need to be trained for it beforehand, and everybody needs to know who it is that is part of this reserve, so that people don't turn up when a bomb falls on an electricity substation and says, I can help. It's too late at that point.
Elizabeth Bra of the Atlantic Council, thank you so much for explaining all of that from southern Sweden. Now here's Carlotta Rebello with the day's other news headlines.
Thanks, Chris. Japan's Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi has pledged to overhaul the nation's defense strategy, ease curbs on military exports and strengthen critical supply chains. In her first post-election speech to Parliament, Takaichi warned of growing Chinese coercion. Flights at Vienna Airport have been suspended this morning due to heavy snowfall, with delays expected to continue throughout the day. So far, 150 flights scheduled in and out of Vienna have been cancelled. And police in Thailand caught a burglary suspect by dressing up in a lion costume during this week's Lunar New Year festivities. The officers were wearing a red and yellow lion outfit when they arrested a man accused of stealing Buddhist artifacts worth around 50,000 euros. Those are today's headlines. Back to you, Chris.
Thanks very much, Carlotta. Apparently there is a video of that last headline you can check out as well from Thailand. Quite the coup from the police there. But here on Monocle Radio now, U.S. President Donald Trump's recent dismissal of the contributions of America's allies to America's 21st century wars went down, well, predictably badly with politicians in those countries, but especially with politicians who are themselves veterans of those conflicts. Mike Martin is a Liberal Democrat MP for Tunbridge Wells here in the UK. He served several stints in Afghanistan as a British Army officer and now sits on the House of Commons Defence Select Committee. He is the author of Why We Fight and How to Fight a War and an advocate for European rearmament. Monocle's Andrew Muller spoke to Mike Martin at the recent Munich Security Conference. Andrew began by asking him about reports that the UK does not actually have a defence plan.
So, yeah, what you're referring to is this plan around homeland resilience. So how do we make sure the water supply carries on and all the rest of it in the event of an attack? Now, that doesn't exist. But I think the other things we brought out in that session really was this idea that at the moment, geopolitical threat is going up, it's increasing. But actually, as we stand here and speak now in Munich, British capability, military capability, is declining. And so having those two things diverge is absolute madness at the moment.
But you told the big issue, I think, quite recently, that you thought there was a 50% chance of a war before the next general election in the United Kingdom, which, well, in theory, gives us 3.5 years to play with. But do you still think that's an accurate assessment? And if so, what kind of war are we talking about?
Well, there are lots of areas of risk. And we also have quite an ambiguous geopolitical environment where we have actors, I'm thinking predominantly actually of the US here, who traditionally have been a very steady actor, acting in a way that's unplanned, uncoordinated with allies, and frankly a little bit random. And when you put those two things together, areas of risk, so for instance, we've got 1,000 British troops in Estonia, right? And you also have a main ally in the US who's unpredictable and acting in a random way. Often those things conflate, and what happens is people make mistakes. Wars don't often start deliberately. Often they start by mistake. You know, think of the famous First World War, railway timetables and all the rest of it. Nobody wanted to get into that. But once somebody had made a move, second, third, fourth, fifth order effects meant that suddenly everyone was in a war. And that's not inconceivable in the environment that we have at the moment.
In such an eventuality, though, does Europe have to assume that the United States won't necessarily be on its side?
Absolutely, it should assume that. We would hope that that's not the case, but absolutely we should assume that. And let me give you an example. Let's go back to Estonia. So we've got 1,000 British troops there, and there are some French, there's a French, a couple of hundred French, and they're under Estonian command. So let's say that the Russians put little green men into Narva, which is the Estonian town.
This is the nightmare scenario. Yeah. It's the rerun of Ukraine 2004.
Right, and then the Estonians say, we're going. Britain, France, you coming with us? And we'll say, hang on a minute, we're just speaking to Washington to see what they want to do. And Washington says, where's Estonia or something, right? And then you've got this incredibly difficult position as Britain and France as to say, are we going to go all in on this? Now, yes, I think we would, but then we would be caught without the Americans. And that is not an inconceivable scenario. And so whilst we don't want that to happen, you should plan for what's realistic or worst case and hope for best case.
But does that involve planning around or at least parallel to the ideal of NATO? Because little green men manifesting in Narva coming across the river from Ivangorod would appear to be an open and shut Article 5 case. This is NATO territory. But if the United States doesn't respond, and Estonia certainly would invoke Article 5 in those circumstances, if the United States doesn't respond, NATO's finished, isn't it?
Well, so I think what I'd like to see at the moment is what we need to get to is effectively a Europeanized NATO. It's able to act without American command structures and American enablers.
Right? Like the coalition of the willing.
Well, in an ideal world, these coalition of willing conversations will be a precursor to what this is. I would broaden it out slightly. I would include Canada. I would also include Ukraine, right? Massive standing army, understand how the Russians think, probably world leaders in drone technology. And that European NATO, some sort of treaty organization, we already have the NATO idea, the doctrine, we train together, so we don't actually need to replace any of that. But working through those same structures, and actually the Americans would quite like us to do this as well, we should work out how the Europeans can lead collective defense without the Americans. That's the exam question. And then I go slightly further as well. It's not just about operations and training, it's also about procurement. Like the absolutely crazy thing in Europe is that we spend a huge amount of money on defense, but don't get much output. And the reason for that is because every country has their own rifle, their own tank, their own whatever, right? Europe should have one rifle, should have one infantry fighting vehicle, should have one tank, right? And they should be produced under license around Europe. Or there are loads of different models for doing it. But it's absolutely nuts to have all of these different segmentation and compartmentalization in our procurement. That should all be joint.
So this has been a point that's been made by, well, quite a lot of people over the last couple of years of trying to avoid the absurd situation where you have a Ukrainian gunner trying to put a Danish shell into an Italian cannon. But does that nations, even within the EU, as you know, tend to get a bit protective / sentimental about their own defence forces. Would people not be worried that if we have the idea of one European rifle, one European cannon, we are moving inexorably towards one European military?
I mean, we spoke here about what a European NATO works like without the US. I mean, that sounds kind of along the similar journey, right? I mean, whether you call it a European army or a European NATO, or whatever you call it, it doesn't actually matter, right? What we're talking about is integrated capability, drawing on the economic power of the countries of Europe to create a military that's able to fight. And all of this national friction, it's not just joint procurement. It's, I was speaking to the CEO of a major defense provider last night, and they were telling me that, when we develop a new drone, to move it into the different countries, although we have the single market, actually defense stuff is reserved. So to move that drone into Poland to test it, we need to do a whole load of new paperwork. So there's all sorts of frictions in Europe that hamper our collective procurement, testing and operationalization of kit. And all of that needs to go. We are, to come back to your earlier question, we're at war now with Russia. It's not that there's going to be a future war. The Prime Minister's house in the UK, right, was set, the car outside was set on fire, right? We've had people murdered by chemical agents, right? We've had people killed in hospitals. We are already at war. What more needs to happen for us to actually get on with it and start dealing with the problem?
The MP Mike Martin there speaking with Andrew Muller in Munich. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. You are back with The Briefing. I'm Chris Chermak, and now the Winter Olympics are nearing their conclusion in Milan. There is still one big weekend left, but before we get there, well, we decided it's time for one more round of which alpine nation is the best, Austria or Switzerland, because as we discussed last week on this show, there are few countries in the world for which specifically the Winter Olympics matter more. Well, here to argue the Swiss corner is once again Monocle Radio's producer in Zurich, Desiree Bandley. And for any listeners who don't know, I am both Austrian and American, but when it comes to the Winter Olympics, Desi, as you know, I very much take the Austrian side. And Desi, we win.
No, you don't. No, Chris, you don't. No. Look, I have here an independent. No, I'm looking at the Swiss news. They have like the table, and we're 7th currently, and you're 9th. I get it. You have more medal overall, but we have one more gold.
See, but the fun thing here is, Desi, that I can go to my other side, the Americans, and look at NBC's Olympic coverage, and they have us in 7th place, and you're all the way down in the 11th, because they do go by the total medals.
Do they? No, we don't trust
them.
We don't trust them. No, we don't. No, we don't trust.
So I think, well, we'll call it a tie, but fine. Give us the gold medal count, if you will.
The gold medal, we actually 6. We have 6 now, and you have 5. So who knows? It's tight. I get it. Also, I have to mention in the Swiss ranking, in between we have the Germans. So it's us, the Germans, and then you guys.
Well, we're not going to mention that. We already discussed last week how we both want the Germans to lose. But we do have one more chance in the newest Olympic discipline. At least the Austrians have one more chance. The skimo. The first races were yesterday, and as much as it pains me to say it, the Swiss won one of those too.
We did. So the women one, we won. Marianne Faton won, which was very good. But then I do have to say it was a bit of a disappointing for us to not get at least a medal on the men's final, because we did have 2 candidates who did actually really well. They were leading, I think, for a quarter, maybe a third of the race, but then one had problems taking off the skis and putting it in like this little backpack construction. And then another one fell up the stairs twice. And that was it for us.
It is such an incredible race. Any listeners who haven't watched it, it is an incredible thing to watch. It's very quick, and it's both of these sides, right? You have all these skiers racing up a hill, first of all. And I was just amazed by how many elements there were to this, Desi, including, as you say, this bit where all of a sudden, like they're kind of walking up the mountain with their skis. Then they take the skis off and they have to race up steps.
Yeah. And then they have to take those like things off to ski down and put it in a pouch. And a little bit of a parkour part as well, where you can't really overtake. No, it's actually to see, it's quite fascinating. And I love that you actually had visitors all along. That it wasn't just like at the end you had people watching. No. You could actually see it from the start to the end. You could stand right by them and cheer them on.
And a shout out, we should say both perhaps, to Spain. That was pretty cool that Spain of all countries managed to get the gold in the men's.
Yeah, it hurts me to say, because it's their first gold as well at these Winter Olympics, but well deserved. He was by far the fastest, well deserved.
So I did want to ask you as well, Desi, just how the Swiss papers have been covering these Olympics. I'm curious how they feel. There have been a lot of recriminations in Austria, I can tell you, because skiing is what matters most. That's what we take most seriously. The Austrian men's coach, his job is under threat for a lowly silver in the men. And even on the women's side, you've had this whole debate over a problem, a controversy that they had, where one of the coaches gave one of the women, Julia Scheib, a poor line that cost her a medal. Do the Swiss get into that kind of grander detail? How are they feeling about these Olympics?
I think alpine skiing, we did very well with the men, and the women one is also a bit of a problem. So we managed to get only one silver medal in slalom, so the last chance we had, and we managed to get a silver, but for us as well, that's not good enough. Obviously with the men we can't complain. We had Von Allman who won 3 gold, so that's fine. Ice hockey, we were a bit disappointed, so we lost against Finland. The women did great, bronze medal, so that's perfect. But the men did lose again against Finland, and we were leading till I think like 3 minutes before we finished, and then we conceded 2 goals in 72 seconds, which is not great. So I think there's a bit of this discussion of, might that just be it? Are we not good enough to ever make the next big step?
Desi, just very quickly, finally, what will you be watching this weekend? Anything?
Bobsleigh. I think we go back to the ice canal to watch how they're doing.
The bobsled is good. I will be watching the skimo certainly as well. Monocle's Desiree Bandley in Zurich. Thank you for joining us. And finally, on today's show, let's turn to our team in Milan, who have been reporting on the Winter Games over the past 2 weeks. They had their last show earlier today. Monocle's Andrew Muller spoke with Raffaella Paniè, the director of brand identity and look of the Games. Basically the person responsible for everything from the signage to the mascots, the medals, and more. Andrew started by asking her if she was happy with how the Games have turned out.
Well, I'm more than happy. It's really being proud because it's not only, of course, these last weeks. It's the last 4 years actually. So a lot, as you were saying, a lot of the work that we have done. It's the look of the Games, but it's also the torch we saw in the torch relay. It's the medals we see on the neck of the athletes. It's the podium design. So it really comes all together, and it's so nice to see it because we've been dealing with single projects, and now we see them all together.
I mean, this is not the first time you've done this. You performed a similar role for the Turin Winter Olympics in 2006. How different has the experience been?
Well, it's been different for me personally because it's 20 years later, 20 years more experience, and I must say I've had much more fun this time. I've always had this feeling that you can do it, you can make it, and things at one point come together. It's challenging because even though you've got that past experience, you even more want to do something different, of course, than what you've done before. But in general, I think it's just these two are the best experiences I've had in my life, so really happy to be able to have them.
Well, take our listeners back to the start of this process, because it does seem like kind of a big ask. When someone comes to you and says, design us an Olympic Games, where do you even start?
Well, you start with an emblem, but even before that, it's really very much about positioning. So it's strategy more than it becomes before it becomes a design, and it's brand personality. We worked a lot on that, and interviewing people, staff, stakeholders, sponsors, even the mayors. To understand what would you like to see of these games, what what would you like people to remember about these games? So, and once we got that, and we defined our personality in wanting to explore more the Italian spirit, being vibrant, dynamic, and contemporary. That's really been very much our guidance. So from there, it's been easier when we got to the mascot, trying to make sure it fitted into that personality, the torch design, the medals design, the look of the games. So really, that has been our beginning.
But when you had those conversations with people, what do you want the look of these games to reflect about your city or your region? What do they tell you?
Well, of course, everyone had their own point of view, so it was a long work we did with our agency to try and filter that and make sure that we had something common. And the common word for all of them was beauty. Mm-hmm. And so we had a lot of discussion about that. You talk about Italy, beauty, and that was something we didn't want to go into stereotyping. So we thought, yes, it's beauty, but it's beauty more under the surface. It's beauty of the people, of our attitude, of the way of living, and I think that's where we've moved it to simple beauty of the landscape, of the food and the wine and all that, to something more deeper.
But how much thought went into something even as basic, and I have to ask because you are wearing the tracksuit top with the colours of these games on them, and obviously those colours are a deliberate decision. How did you arrive at those?
We worked with this very good brand design agency, Angelini Design, and they supported us in this. We had the experience of the observation in Paris, where we saw that in that case it was that pink colour that worked very well. Mm-hmm. So we were looking for our pink color, and we decided that the teal green that is something that is very present in Milan, in some of the buildings, it's in the mountains. It was going to be our color, our main guidance color, and so we worked around that one and made sure that it was a cross color and was working with all the other colors of the palette.
But across the whole process, how much trial and error, or error and trial, is involved? I mean, how often did you find yourself over the years of development pursuing an idea to a certain point and then just going, actually, this doesn't work?
Every time. Every time. I think the word that I've been using more is flexibility. So, and part of that flexibility is going back on your footsteps and saying, okay, this is just not working. And that's where sometimes in the challenge you find the real good idea. And it's really happened with the mascot. It's happened with the torch design. It happened with the medals. So very much, yes.
So if we focus that question then to, for example, the mascot, what nearly went wrong? What could the mascot have been that it isn't?
Well, it was finding the way to transform an animal, which could be any animal at the end, into a character, to put that personality. I think that has been the biggest challenge. And when we managed that and we saw it come true, then that's when we thought, okay, we are in the right direction. There was a lot of designing, a lot of details on the eyes, the eyebrows, the mouth, and at one point they just come all together and you say, okay, this is it, it's right.
Which is a partial answer to my next question, because with any big project, whatever it is, there obviously has to come a point at which the person in charge just goes, all right, we're done, we're finished, this'll do. Sometimes that's dictated by a deadline. You just don't have a choice, and any journalist listening will know that feeling. But for you, with this huge endeavour, I mean, what did you apply definite criteria to everything, saying, okay, this is when we know this is right, or was it just you knew it when you saw it?
I would say the second. You go a little bit by instinct at one point, and of course, having tried different options, you know where you're getting. Deadlines, of course, do help to accelerate, at least to accelerate. It's not that you get to a point where anything is right, but I think the deadlines accelerate the process. So at one point you think, okay, we need to give this a push, and that's where things maybe change.
Well, just finally, then, we are coming up towards the end of these games, which, as we were discussing, is the second Winter Olympic Games that you've designed. You earlier in this discussion described both of those as the sort of greatest professional experiences of your life. If somebody asked, would you put yourself through this again?
Maybe yes. I think you should ask me in a few weeks' time when I've probably recovered a bit with all the hassle. But yes, I think it's just so special, and I think it's really special to be able to do it if you're dealing with brand in your own country. I think it would be probably difficult for me to do it in another country because there's so much knowledge and in the process about your country, what you want to say, what you don't want to say. It's probably difficult if you're not born in that country.
Well, just final question then. If by chance whoever has been given the job of dealing with design for the next Winter Olympics occurring in France happens to be tuning in, is there any advice you'd pass on to them?
Well, I would just say enjoy and build a lot on people. I think what has made the difference for me in this experience is the people that have been working with me in the team, and they have really changed the possibility of it to be a super experience or not, and it's been super.
Raffaella Paniè, Director of Brand, Identity and Look of the Games, in conversation with Monocle's Andrew Muller on the final edition of Monocle in Milan. Check back for all the episodes wherever you get your podcasts. That's all the time we have for this edition of The Briefing. It was produced by Carlotta Rebello, our researcher was Annalise Maynard, and our studio manager was Elliot Greenfield. The Briefing is back on Monday at the same time. I'm Chris Jermack. Have a great weekend, everyone. Goodbye, and thanks for listening.